My name is Maria Barnes, and I am the chapter president of our AccessUserGroups.org lunchtime chapter. Today, I'm going to give you a demo of the new Access connector for Dataverse. Once you get your data in Dataverse, you can use the Power Platform to access that and extend what you might have been able to do from within Access. Why did I choose this? I chose it because it is the only feature from Access that was released this year. It was released into beta in November, and then the general availability is scheduled for March right now. They worked all year long on it, and well, I'm sure basics of it beforehand. And it's kind of exciting. It's exciting because it helps enable more things like mobile access. Now, not that you couldn't do that anyway. You could have set up a PowerApp in the past and connected your data to SQL or to something like SharePoint lists. I like SharePoint lists, but they really are, in my mind, designed for simple data holders. It's not true relational database like Dataverse is. I also thought today there's several other good videos that you can watch of how to do this. Nathan Helgren, who is one of the PowerApps program managers, has done some good ones. There's believe it or not, he does it in 2 minutes where he shows you both how to link and how to build a PowerApp. It's called Migrate Microsoft Access Data to Microsoft Dataverse. So if you're interested, search for that. And also in our December Pacific Access User Group, their December meeting, which is, I believe, on YouTube already. The Access Program Manager, Michael Aldrich, did about 20 minutes of a demo. And so it's good too. But my hope today is to give you just a little bit slower demo and to talk about some of the nitty-gritties that they have not yet mentioned to my knowledge. So first of all, what I picked for this, and I'm going to put this in chat, is based on a template. So this is the featured access templates linked. And I chose the inventory template. So this is what it looks like here. It's reasonably simple. It's got 6 tables here. It's got about the same number of queries. It's got maybe a dozen forms and a few reports. So this is a smallish access database. And what I'm thinking, this happens to be the default form that opens up, is that if I'm a company and I'm maintaining inventory and I've got somebody back at the office that maybe is, adding inventory or making adjustments, I also maybe have somebody that's out on the inventory floor and they have a mobile phone, and that's their way of accessing the data. And thus, unless we try to do some kind of a virtual machine sign in, which even that, usually real estate and that is hard on a phone, it would be much easier for that person to use a PowerApp to access the data. So I chose this template. I'm going to share my PowerPoint presentation. I'm not going to share this actual database because you can pull this template from that link I send and try this yourself in your own Dataverse environment. So before you look at actually doing a migration, you need to make sure that you have the prerequisites. And those prerequisites, there's actually another good link here, and I do have also these links on the last slide, so you'll get those through the presentation, so you don't have to copy these links right now, but I wanted to also give them to you during the presentation so that if you wanted to go look at these items that you could. The first thing you need is some type of Dataverse environment. There's a couple different choices. One is the normal PowerApps environment, but you should know that even though Dataverse is considered the kind of default or native connector, it's actually also a premium connector. So if you are going to use Dataverse with the normal PowerApps, you need some kind of PowerApps license in order to do so. You can also, if you have a Teams environment, set up PowerApps and a Dataverse environment from the PowerApps interface within Teams. And if you're going to use Dataverse that way, it is free. There are some differences and some limitations, like size limitations, for example, on that. But you can Google that and get more information about the nitty-gritties back and forth. From the purposes of what I'm going to do today, I'm going to demo this within normal PowerApps, but the interface with Access is exactly the same. So whichever one that you choose, it's pretty much the same. There are also some a few limitations to the types of data that as far as field types and that kind of stuff. That's a Dataverse limitation, not a connector limitation, but there are differences between Dataverse within Teams and PowerApps, at least at the moment. Within Teams, Dataverse is newer. So stepwise, it's recommended, of course, that you make a backup first. It's also recommended that you make a plan. What are you going to do? Choose your tables that you're going to export, maybe review their relationships, the relationship diagram, and possibly print the designs of the tables. When we're doing validation here, the reason for doing that will become a little bit more clear. And then also I recommend that you close any open forms, like for example on our inventory database, which I'll pull back over here. I'm going to close this form that auto opens before I actually do the export. So let's see what else. So we have here 6 tables. I'm going to go ahead and pull up the relationships diagram here. And if you download this, your relationship diagram is going to look a little bit different. It's the same relationship diagram. I just made the sizes of the tables that are showing bigger, and I reorganized the way they displayed so that you could see the relationships more clearly. So the inventory transactions table is the one that the form that I'm going to want to duplicate in a mobile environment is from. And it has 3 related tables. It's got an inventory table that it's linked on, it's got an employee table, and it's got a transaction type table. And then that inventory table also is linked to a supplier table. So that filters table is not included at all in any of these relationships. So what I am thinking as an initial plan is because I'm going to only be editing inventory, I'm going to take this table and then the 3 tables that are related to it. I'm going to skip the suppliers in my first pass here. So let's see. So that's our plan. And taking a look at the different export options, I'm going to talk a little bit about all of these here. But you have those as kind of a reference point as I talk through here. Let me also mention that this is one single database. The front end and back end are all together. The tables are right here in the front end with the form. If you are going to do this with a database where you have it already separated, where your tables are in the back end, then your export process will be done from your back end. And then you are going to create links separately from your front end. And if you already have data in Dataverse, whether it's because you've already exported your tables from a backend or whether you have them there for some other reason, you can go to External Data, New Data Source from Online Services and select this Dataverse and then connect to the Dataverse and select the tables or tables to import links to. For our purposes, let me click on a table so that it shows up. We're going to use external data export to Dataverse. And then I'm going to pick the tables I want. You can select all, and then you can deselect like that. So remember I said I was not going to take the filters because it's not related, and I was not going to take suppliers because I don't need to edit inventory. So that's my reasoning behind it. And I wanted to leave as much as possible in Access. I didn't want to expose it to Dataverse if I didn't need to. It probably takes more time to communicate with Dataverse than it does with your local area network because it's in the cloud. So after you select the tables, you get this screen, and this has several different options in it. The very first thing is to specify the data environment that you want. And if you are logged into Office, like if you have an Office 365 and you're logged in with your Office account, it should recognize any Dataverse environments that you have access to. And notice it's got the name. This name actually starts with Barnes Business. The last used indicator indicates that this is the last one that I used. It's got the URL, which if you click on one or the other, it changes the field down here. And it's got even the type, whether it's standard Dataverse or whether it's Teams over here. And if you happen to have a lot of them, you could use the search here to search for items here and narrow down this list. If you don't see anything, then what you can do is go to PowerApps.com. Show that here. So you go to the PowerApps.com environment and you make sure you sign in. If you don't see yourself in the indicator, you have to log in first. And then you go to the Settings tab and the Admin Center. And then that should show you your environments. You select the environment that you want, and then you want this environment URL here. So you can actually right-click on it and copy the link, and then you would paste that into your bar here with the HTTPS : and then that should pull that up and you can use that environment. So we also have the export related tables. So if you do not check that, then it will not export other related tables. Remember that we are selecting inventory table, and it has a related table called suppliers. I did not select that. So if you have that selected, you can go to select related tables and view those tables. And I don't know if you noticed, but the other tables that we pre-selected going into this screen, those are grayed out. So you can't like uncheck those. But this one, it checked for me because I selected export related tables. So I can uncheck that if I want to. So that's one option there to do that. And as I understand it right now, remember that this is in beta, so they're still working out some of the kinks, but they're going to work on making this button not work if you uncheck that. Right now it does work, so you can pull those up if you've unchecked that. But I'm going to do them all, and let's make sure I have that unselected. This option is to link to the Dataverse table after exporting. So what's going to happen here if I leave this checked is that all of these tables will get renamed. Well, first they'll get exported into Dataverse, then they'll get renamed as local tables, and then I will have linked tables to the new Dataverse tables if I check this box. So if you're going to do this from a back end, you should uncheck this because you don't want links in the back end. You want your links to be in the front end, and then you would use that import and link new data source to get the link tables that direction. Take a look there and do what you want to do here. And then this one option is just whether or not you want the URL, which is this one here, to be opened again after I'm done. So Access will actually open it up in whatever your default browser is for you. I have that unchecked just because I already have it open, so I didn't want two windows for confusion. Then we have this concept of primary name fields, and I want to talk a little bit about that. When I first saw that, I was thinking primary key, right? We're used to doing that. We're used to having some type of identifier. Most of the time, it's an AutoNumber field. Some of the time, we use something else, like maybe a description name or something like that, if it's going to be unique, or we have a smaller table or something like that. But we're used to thinking about a primary key. A primary name field is not a primary key. The purpose of it is to display a link to open the record in a user interface. So if you think about it, and when we talk here on the next slide about what the actual primary keys are in Dataverse, you will realize even more why they don't use the IDs as a link. IDs can be, kind of something that's not, I mean, we don't memorize. If you're employee number 5 or employee number 845, you don't usually memorize your employee number or whatever the ID is. Or somebody who's using the system doesn't usually memorize those IDs. They're usually thinking more about some kind of more descriptive, a company name, maybe a social security number if it's an employee or something like that. So that is what the purpose of the primary name is. And I'm going to pull up or put in the chat here another link. This is a link about entities in Dataverse, and it just explains a little bit more about the primary key and about other aspects of Dataverse tables. And so it's a good resource to have, and if you want more information about this. So only short text fields are eligible to be a primary key. You cannot use integers. That means if you are using an AutoNumber as a primary key, for example, at the moment at least, you cannot use that as the primary name field. So let's go back to our database here and take a look at this. And you can just let it use the default if you want and not go through this step, but I really recommend that you take a look, and I think you'll see why. So these are my 4 tables that I've selected. This is employees. So it has selected company because it is the first one. But I don't think that's really a very good name. It's not close to unique. And Adrian has asked the question whether or not the primary name field has to have unique values. And the answer is no. But for all purposes, it should have fairly close to unique values, because you're going to use it to click on to get to the record in Dataverse. So I'm going to choose last name. You could have chosen email address or something like that, possibly, but for this purpose, I'm going to change it to last name. And then the others, inventory, I like the item. That's really the description of the inventory. That makes sense. For inventory transactions, I only have two, PO number and comments. Well, I don't really like either of those, frankly, but I'm going to go with PO number. Now, if I wanted to at this point, I could cancel out of this, cancel out of the export, and go modify my table so that it had a primary name that I liked or something like that. But then we're talking about modifying the design of what we've got going here. One other note, that if there are no short texts in your table, it will actually create a new one and use that. Can you change the primary name later? I believe you can, from Dataverse, change the primary name. There are certain things that you can't change about tables in Dataverse. We're going to go through those later, and they are actually making improvements to increasing the number of things you've changed, removing some of the limits. They're working on that, but I believe you can change the primary name later. And then transaction types. That one is description. There's only two of them. I like that. So we're going okay. All right, and then we're going to say next. And before I do that, let me just take another quick look here at the next session and talk about primary keys. And I think we're thinking about them because we talked about the primary names and we're used to primary keys. So this is what's going to happen. The new keys or the keys that Dataverse uses are GUID keys. So if you're familiar with a GUID is a big long string. It's usually got a mix of characters and numbers, and it's really nonsense to read. And there's a that's what it is, stands for, is Globally Unique Identifier. Thank you, Adrian. Anyway, so that's it has to be a GUID field. And I'm not positive, I haven't tried this yet. I believe if you already have a GUID in your access table, then it can use that. But if you don't, it will create a new GUID field, and anything that you had as a primary key defined in your table, it will record it in Dataverse under the keys section as a secondary key. So I don't know all the details behind this yet because this is still new, but if you have an AutoNumber, Access will, during the migration, have a translation layer that lets Access use the AutoNumber primary key for our forms, and Dataverse to use the use the GUID key. So anytime you make like a PowerApp or do something with relationships in Dataverse, it will always use the GUID. But there's like an interface, and the presence that it actually does port your AutoNumber key over to Dataverse. And when we look at what it looks like afterwards, I'm going to try to point that out to you, the different fields that are added because of it. But Access tries to keep them in sync. And it keeps using like your auto numbering scheme and incrementing that auto number field that you use. Like if you had, in our case, I don't know that we looked at it real carefully, but it's, and you can't really see it here, and it didn't pop up in the select primary fields, but I believe like most of these have what's just named ID, and it's an auto number field, and that's pretty standard to do in Access. So there's a synchronization process and a use of multi-fields that is done so that you can keep using your old identifier and not have to use the new GUID and change all your code. However, and I'll try to point this out at the end, you should check your queries and your code, meaning your forms, after the fact, after the migration, to make sure they still work. I had some problems with updatability in queries, and I had some problems with forms that were supposed to be updatable where they had combo boxes. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. But okay, so this is the actual process. What happens when you run the export? The first thing to do is it runs a validator. Karl mentions in his opinion that you can't change the primary name field after it has been created. Certainly, I think it's better to take a look and try to get it right the first time at the very minimum. And if you do this wrong and it's not what you want, you can delete the tables in Dataverse and you can try it again, right? That's why you take a backup though, right? All right, so let's take a look here. So I'm going to start this with next. Okay, and so right away it starts running the validator and it comes up with this message. Field of type rich text is not supported in Dataverse. And here's where I want to send you a couple links here. And these talk about different data types and what is supported and what is not, what they are called, like a translation of one type name to the other, because even though they transfer, or a lot of them transfer, they don't necessarily transfer with the same data type name. So those are both two good sources. I will also point out that, remember, we're still in beta. I've seen some discrepancies between these two documents. So hopefully we'll get that figured out and get those cleaned up, and they'll both say the same thing in the same spots when they do overlap. So this doesn't tell you what table it has the problem, or maybe tables, but it tells you the error. And I believe that if you have more than one type of error, then you will get both of those listed, not just the first one. Crystal has asked whether the attachment data type is supported. And yes, it is supported, even though one of the documentations here, I believe, says it's not. It is supported. Only one attachment goes over. The name is actually file. In Dataverse, it's called file type. And is MultiValue. But MultiValues are not supported right now. I think there is some plan for them. The other question about long integers, and I think they are not yet either, but there is plans to support those. All right, so one really nice thing here is there's the option, if you get errors, to create this column validation error table. And I highly suggest that you do that. So I'm going to click that and it's going to create it. And then I could say okay and go on. What would happen if I did that is that any rich text fields would not go over to Dataverse. The tables would still go, but they would go minus those fields. So that's important to know. In this case, I've already created this, which it looks like it grays out after you do it. And then I'm going to go ahead and cancel. Okay, and then here we have the table. And it didn't really kind of appear here until after I canceled out, but whatever, that's okay. It's got an order. So here's what we've got. We've got employees and inventory. Those are our objects. Those are the table names. These are the field names that are a problem. Here's the field types and the reason, which is pretty much exactly what it said. Rich text type is not supported for export. So again, I have choices. I can modify these tables and try it again, or I can leave these tables off. So I think these are both pretty important tables. So I'm going to go ahead and modify them. And see, we said terrible at memory. Notes. So it's not a problem to have a long text. It is, however, a problem to have this be rich text. So I just change it to plain text, and do I want to convert it? Yes. Yes, I want to save. And then I want inventory. And I'm going to change this from rich text to plain text. Okay, so that's that. The first time I did this, I did it exactly as we talked about. I left off the suppliers table, and there was an error. The employees, the inventory transactions, and the transaction types all came over to Dataverse. But it looked like there was an error maybe bringing over inventory because I didn't get a linked table for inventory at the end. I got it for the other 3 tables, and there were no relationships in Dataverse, which the relationships that you have set up should port over to Dataverse. So I have reported that to the Access team. I think it's a problem that I didn't select the related table and that there's some kind of bug with that. So this time around, we're going to do this again, and we are going to select that table as well. So this time I'm going to select all, and I'm just going to, and I don't really want this validation table either. So we've got this time 5 tables instead of 6 tables. I'm going to keep the same environment. I'm going to keep export related tables. I'm going to link to it. I'm going to uncheck open Dataverse. I'm going to check my select primary name keys, and look at this. It remembered that I had last name here selected. So that memory seems to be session related. If I exit this database and come back in, it doesn't seem to remember that selection, but it does keep this in memory somehow. And that's nice. I think it's a great little add-on to remember that, so you don't have to go back. I've only got 5 tables here, but say you were doing, more than that. And I do have suppliers here as an additional one. I like company, so we're going to keep that. So we're going to go ahead here. I did get a field of type rich text again. I happen to know that that's from my supplier column. And I don't really care about it this time. So for example, I'm just going to go ahead. I'm not going to create this again. I'm going to go ahead and go with OK. So this is what it does then. Once you've passed validation, stop so you can see it happening, hopefully. It goes through some steps. First, it retrieves a list of tables from the Dataverse environment. Then it does this exporting of selected objects. You do get a little bit of a sense of a slider bar here, and it will, go across. It's the whole process doesn't really have a slider bar, but this one particular process does. When it's done, you'll have a prompt about importing the selected tables and the related tables, and then a message when you're done. Sometimes you get some other messages. I've already done this, and I have a demo set up, if we have time to look at that, of an actual PowerApp using the tables. So hopefully we'll get to that. But in any case, my tables, all these tables are already in my Dataverse environment. So what it's going to do is it's going to create new tables in this case, and it's going to append a number to it. So it's going to append the number 1 to it. If I already had a inventory 1, they would make an inventory 2. I believe, get a warning about that here in this. If it doesn't see that, if they're fresh named, then you wouldn't get that kind of warning. And so you would be missing a couple of the things that you'll see here in a minute. And obviously this does take a little time.
Sorry to interrupt.
No, this is a good time for it. We're waiting, right?
I was going to say, if you're waiting for things to happen, Crystal had a question in the chat that you might be able to help with.
And about long text, you mean?
Yes, about how Access handles them by default.
It does handle long text.
Jan has talked about 3 different types of text fields, and then the question is, how does Access interrelate with those? That's my paraphrasing.
Oh, okay. As far as a one-to-one kind of thing. So here's a, if I can get this out of the way. Here's a kind of a conversion. So we're talking about short text. It goes to type text. Long text, it goes to type multi-line text. He talks about
Text area.
Text area, and it looks like currently the interface is not using that. So it would go from, it would choose either text or multi-line text. It would not choose that interim text area. And maybe that might change in the future, but at the moment, it's going to choose based on your type. It's not going to look at the 4,000 character or the number of characters that you have defined. It's going to go with either text or multi-line text right now. And here's where you see attachment goes to file, hyperlink goes to URL. Oh, looks like we do have MultiValue lookups. It goes to something called choice, but it has a little identifier here, only 1 column MultiValue lookups. I've kind of forgotten about this. I don't like MultiValue lookups, but I know people who are used to working in SharePoint, for example, are used to them, and that's actually why Access supports them, because of the SharePoint interface that was developed some number of years ago.
Sure.
All right, let's check on our...
Thank you for that, Maria.
Yes, no, thanks for pointing that out, and this was a great time. Do I have a long integer in my tables? I seem to remember a discussion about it. Let's see if we can pull that up while this is still running. This talks a little bit about Dataverse versus Dataverse for Teams and the types of data that's supported, and also about the limits and stuff. This is a good reference for that. Talks about terminology differences. And I thought one of these had a bit about things that weren't supported. Okay, so this number single and number double. It doesn't mention long int though, does it? That's a very good question, Karl. I will try to give that a try and take a look at that after the fact. Okay, so here we are. We've got this. All tables that didn't encounter an error have been successfully exported. The following tables were renamed during the export because a table with the same name already exists on the endpoint. So that's kind of nice. It shows you right there. I'm going to show you in another place that you can see that after the fact in case you forget exactly, you know, which ones are renamed and which weren't. But they're going to look the same from your application. All right. So this is the beta version, just to be clear. Yes, that's the only thing available right now is beta version. I'm on Access Insiders, and that's how you get that. And that, I believe the second link, the one with the prerequisites, I think that has a link to the to how to get into the beta if you're interested in joining the beta and trying this out. Okay, so get the message when you're done. Okay, let's take a look at what it looks like post-export. So we have in our database here, we have the original tables, employee local, inventory transactions, etc. They're same name and they have an underscore local appended to them. And then we have these links to the actual tables, And if you hover over them, you can see both the actual name of the table in Dataverse. So see how it says employees 1, and then you have the URL to the environment. So that's what you see from Access. If you go to Dataverse, in your environment, when you're signed in, you can go down to Data section and to Tables, and you will see them there. I'm going to close the settings and make this bigger. So here you see under Name, you see the original names, except for they don't have, this is actually the one that I did on my first pass. This is the one we did today, for example. This is the one we did today. This is the one we did today. It's got your named table with no capitalization, and then it's got a prefix in front of it. That prefix is something called a publisher ID, and I did a little digging on that. If I sort here on that, you can see them all together. These are all, notice, type custom, and also the original table name that you've used is what it normally has. In this case, it can't have two of the same name, so it appends the number to it. But this is got the same capitalization that you used in yours, or spacing or whatever, as opposed to like underscores and that kind of thing for the name. Further that I dug into publisher ID, it's actually based on the solution that you're in. And so the Dataverse has this notion of solutions, and then you can have a publisher of a solution. So I think that if you wanted all of the tables from one application to be named with the same one, you could probably create a solution and put them into that, and you know, maybe you could get a more distinct name. Otherwise, if you just keep working in your default solution, there's going to be no easy way to group. You know, say you had 5 tables from one and 10 from another, which of the tables belong to which application? Let's see, what else? That's the table. If you go into the field, like let's go into inventory transactions, since that's the one that we're going to want to use. You can notice that we've got a lot of fields, okay? So there's actually more than what you had in your table. And again, if you sort on this custom, most of the ones that are custom are ones that come from your original table. It's got some extra fields. The original name is pretty much what the display name is like comments, quantity, created date, ID. Here's our original ID, which comes over as a whole number. So it's got some extra fields as well. We're going to talk a little bit more about those on the next screen, and what fields are what. And you can see all of these from your link table in Access as well. So if we look at our inventory transactions and we do like a design view, which you can't actually edit it, but this way you can see them. You see what they are in Access, and you see that for instance, the ID here is still a number. It's field size long integer, so it could be long integer. This was a long integer, so maybe hopefully that answers your question, Karl. Long integers go to, what do we see, whole numbers? Yeah, it says the whole number. So probably ints and long ints both go to whole number. That would be my guess from this. So we've got that. We have other things besides the columns. You have the data here. So if you wanted to get to the data, On inventory transactions, you could use this to display it. There's other ways of editing it through editing it in Excel directly from this interface. You have some views that can be modified and more fields can be added to those views. You have your relationships that came over, and notice that you have more relationships than you had before, but you can see which tables that they go to, and you can also sort by type to see these are the tables or the relationships that you've had set up. We really only had 3 of them before. We had the employee relationship, the transaction type, and the inventory transactions. These are used, I think, by the synchronization process as opposed to, really coming over as part of a port. And then you also have keys, and this is where you'll see like this ID field was the primary key previously. And so it does become a key. It's still a key in Dataverse. It's just not the primary key. It's the secondary key. And if we go back to our columns, we see that the primary key is actually usually named the same as the table itself. So here we have inventory transactions 1. This is of type Unique Identifier, and it's required, and that's the primary key. Also, the order of the fields in the linked table is not preserved. That bothers me a little bit, the fact that I can't see the same. I don't know if you remember what it is, but to pull this up here, it said ID, transaction number, employee. I'd love to see those be ordered the same. Dataverse doesn't really care about order. It has, its UI has different sorts on different types of parts of the field, which is one reason why it doesn't have an order. That may come. It shouldn't bother you unless you're used to editing directly in your tables, or if you're used to editing or doing a query that has like a select star or something like that, and editing directly in your queries. Otherwise, you should be okay, I think, and it may get fixed eventually. We saw the GUID, those extra Dataverse fields that they have, these that I think we can probably see it better from this interface. The ones that are standard, if we're looking at those are all reserved, and Dataverse adds them. Most of them are about who owns it, who modified it, that kind of stuff. Don't delete those. You need to keep those. You shouldn't rename them or remove them. There's a few fields that have an extra field. For example, I think if I sort by display name, you're going to see it better. This is our original ID into the connector, the whole number into the employee table. You have that, and you have a new field, this one here. This is the lookup into the other. So this really will contain the GUID, essentially, to get you to the correct table. And then there's a few other fields. I believe that if you have, I don't have any in this, but if you have things like a currency, there's some extra fields that talk about the currency. You also see this import sequence number. That actually has to do, if you have a AutoNumber, it will actually store like the value of your AutoNumber and use this field for the synchronization process with that. So that's what that one is about. And then if you're in your table itself, you can take a look at, like if you go to the table properties, oops, not that. Here you can actually see the OData connection. So this is another way to get it besides just hovering It'll have the database, it'll be your URL link, and the table name itself. So inventory transactions 1 in this case. So good things to know about that. All right, so if you edit it in Dataverse, you can see it in Access. If you edit it in Access, you can see it in Dataverse. Let me demo that real quick, and then we can take questions. Okay, so I can add, for example, an item here. And then I go over to Dataverse, and I'm going to go here to my apps instead, and I'm going to run that. So here we see this one that we just edited. And then it works the other way too. If you edit something or add something to PowerApps, then you can see it in Access. And I have seen it where you've had to do a refresh all in order to see it in your view. So be aware of that. I did have to make some changes here. I did some delookups instead of a couple of the fields on my form, and I had to actually delete the combo boxes and re-add those from the Access interface in order to get those to work and it still be updatable. There are some options for learning PowerApps if you want. I'm going to make a plug here. I attended a workshop last year. There's a workshop interest page on Karl's website that you can sign up, and then he may have some coming up in April that's part of the normal DevCon conference that he does, but it was really good. It was a 3 or 4 hour workshop where I actually got to, in my own environment, get stepped through creating a PowerApp. So I thought it was really helpful. There was a cost involved, but I thought it was reasonable. And then, yeah, just a final note here. You can delete tables in Dataverse, but you can only do it if they're not in use. For instance, if you created a PowerApp for them, it won't let you delete them. So you would have to delete your PowerApp first, and then you could delete them. And then at the moment, you can't change, here's where we're going to talk about that. You can't change the name or the data type of a column in the user interface in Dataverse. Apparently there's an API out that you can change the data type from right now, and it's going to be in the UI at some point, but it is not available right now from the UI. You can change the display name though. Otherwise, if you really want to change the data type, you have to delete it and re-add the column from the UI. And Karl, you said the API name type. You mean data type? They can only do that by the API from a few for a few types. That may very well be. Yeah. So they've enabled it for some types and not the other. I know there was a discussion I read about the AutoNumber type. That you could do that from the API, changing it back and forth from a normal number to an AutoNumber or a normal string. They actually have strings that's that primary name. It's going to use for the primary name, unless you change it, it will use the first defined string. If your GUID was the first defined string, then it probably would try to use that. I don't know that that's a good idea to use that because GUIDs are not very meanable. I was talking about, I think it uses the GUID as the actual primary key. The primary name is different than the primary key. Also, just take or keep an eye out. Dataverse and making a PowerApp, those are all in a browser UI. You have to save everything. If you go from one screen to the other without, there is a few places that will prompt you and ask you if you want to leave the page without saving, but it's not always nice about that. So make sure you save if you make a change. The very first time I built the PowerApp, I'm used to save, and when I went to save the PowerApp for the first time, it gave me save as, and I'm like, I don't want to save as, I just want to save this. Well, I got through my whole session and spent 3 or 4 hours building a small PowerApp. I left, I came back the next day, it was gone. You have to, first time you do a PowerApp, you have to save as and name it something and put it someplace in the cloud, and then you can save over, but you have to save as the first time. All right, so I'm going to open it up for questions. If I've been kind of trying to watch the chat here and answer some of the questions, but if anybody has an urgent question that didn't get answered, either ask it again or unmute yourself and bring it up. We'll see what we can do here.
Most of the way through, you were answering them as they came up.
Yeah.
I can't put my finger on any that haven't been, so.
Well, I had one question. Sorry to interrupt you.
No problem.
I was wondering about the speed in general. How does it perform?
I think that I haven't had a lot of experience with that, but I have talked to some or heard some comments about it. There is a little bit of a speed issue, obviously. And the PowerApp itself, there are some tricks that you can use to help with that, particularly if you have things like large tables and things like that. Similar to what we do, same kind of idea, but similar to what we do when we have a form that's not bound, and then we bind it later or maybe after a search process or that kind of thing. You might have to think about some other types of usages, if you have large data sets. If you're using smaller data sets or if you're just doing, data entry, I don't think you're going to have, a problem with it as far as speed. It's definitely going to be slower than if you're used to working on a local area network. It shouldn't be much different than using SQL as a backend or anything like that, and it should have some of the similar issues.
Maria, John Clark's got his hand up.
Okay, John, go ahead and can you?
Yeah, actually, Maria, I think you just answered it. The second I raised my hand, I was basically curious exactly what type of architecture is Dataverse using. How is it different
I believe
Azure
it actually,
SQL?
Yeah, I believe it actually uses SQL Azure behind the scenes. That's my understanding.
Kind of like the relationship between SharePoint and SQL Server.
Yes. Steve Bishop has asked about referential integrity. So there are some options here, like, if you delete it, you remove the link that is like it. It's not quite the same type of referential interface anyway that we're used to with our references, where we can set cascading deletes and that kind of stuff. I guess I'll be totally honest, I don't know whether it does that. Karl may know that answer more than I.
Yes, yes, it does.
Does
the
it
type
do
of behavior and the delete is the same, just expressed in another way.
It's so is this so what about the cascade updates and cascade deletes? This
Yes, that's
this
also.
is cascade delete.
Yep.
Is there a separate option for cascade update?
Can't remember. Open it. The type
do you
of
mean?
behavior. The
This
type
one?
of behavior.
It just says referential, parental, or custom.
I think one of them is with update, cascade
Okay.
update.
So we have a whole different terminology here, but the Dataverse itself is a true relational database. It has a lot of the same functionality, in some cases even more functionality. You can do things like grant permissions to columns in here and establish business rules, so that it has a lot to it. And I think one other advantage that we didn't really talk about today is because it works through a security that's built into your environment here, from an IT perspective, they're probably going to like these tables better than they do an access table, because you can get more security as far as allowing who and what to access those.
Mm-hmm. May I add one thing to your story?
Yes.
It's a SQL Server at the backend, that's true. And I actually tried to use Management Studio to connect to it, and it works. It's only a read-only connection.
How do you connect? Do you connect?
I just entered the address of the website of your
URL
website. Just use it and use your Windows credentials, and you'll be working in SQL Server Management Studio.
That's really awesome.
So you need to get the address. You need to get the address of your site.
Right. But that's the same URL that we got here through the the admin center, right? This URL.
Yeah, that's it. That's one.
Yeah.
If you fire up Management Studio and you copy this in, you'll be connecting to your SQL.
Oh, too awesome.
But I should add one more thing then. It's SQL Server, but if you upload files, they will be stored in blob storage for you. And there's also an extra option to upload log files to Dataverse, and then they will be stored in table storage. So they combine the three storage modes actually behind the scenes.
Okay. Good to know. Any other questions or comments?
I did have a couple there. The first one was, is there a RESTful API by chance for access to this?
To Dataverse, you mean?
The Dataverse, yeah, sorry.
I believe there is, yes. I don't have that handy, but that's the same API that lets you do things like change data types and stuff like that.
Okay. And then the second question was, is there cluster management and regional servers?
I am not aware of that, but there is definitely in the admin center, there's definitely a lot of options, and I don't know, to be honest, a lot about that management. But there is definitely a lot of options, and you can do things like create different environments. So you have like a test environment and a dev environment, a test environment, and a production environment. You can take a PowerApp and you can take the solution and you can put it into source code. It's a full range of availability, and there's a lot of learning available online as to how to do different things. Does that answer your question? Maybe a little, other than to say I don't know the exact answer.
That's okay. I don't know is always a perfectly valid answer,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, I think the main thing, because kind of going back to the speed thing, that's kind of what the whole cluster regional thing is that I was asking. It's entirely possible that it's slow in network connection for somebody in the US, but
very much
for Asia.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I was kind of hoping that maybe there might be some regional management there that might be something to help with the speed negotiation.
I have heard people talk about the fact that if you've got even just use a simpler example of a nationwide US company, right? And you want to locate your server in a more central location rather than having it be in California necessarily, or wherever closest to where most of your people need to access it. So that's probably in the simplest instance. There are also size limits as far as how big Dataverse can get, although it's my understanding that once you get beyond like the 10 gigabyte size, that you can then purchase a larger size. So
Yeah.
it comes with a fee.
And of course, there's always managing it through cache, right? So if we can come up with some sort of synchronization of the data tables between a local
Yes.
access table and the regional or the cloud version of the table, so that we have local access to a cached version of the table data, and then only do your transactions. So if you have an update of the data, send it up to the cloud so that it's updated universally quickly. But when you have reads, try to do from read to local. That way you have fast access to your data. That's a strategy that we use all the time in programming to make sure that the application still works very, very quickly while still maintaining data integrity across your cloud version of the data table and your local tables.
Yeah, certainly an option. Probably if you're worried about that kind of those kind of issues, you probably don't have your data in your backend in Access at this point, because you're going to end up with some of the same issues, trying to use a wide area network or whatever. So you probably already got it in some kind of centralized spot.
Yeah. Can I add one more question to this? Is there something like an offline scenario possible?
I have heard that asked. I don't really know a lot about that, but there is a synchronization process. So I'm guessing if it's not there already, then it might be coming to do something like that. PowerApps itself, I don't think, it's a online UI. Although Teams, if you've got it in Teams, maybe it could be offline there. So I'm afraid I don't know really the answer to that.
We'll talk about
Yeah.
how.
Maria, in PowerApps,
Yeah.
you can work offline. There is an offline mode, and you can save things in the local cache on your device and then update it afterwards. I've done it.
So does it stay if you close your browser, or how
Yes,
is it cached?
it is cached in the cache of your device, normally your mobile, for example.
Okay.
Yeah. And afterwards
Well,
you can send.
That's good to know. So
according to Nathan Helgrain, there is also an offline mode in Dataverse, but I've never used it before.
So if there's, I'd be surprised if there's one from the Access interface from the get-go. I think they tried to get a lot of the basics in this first pass, and it is my impression that they'll be continuing to add more features and stuff like that. So, but definitely even the things like the synchronization that it does with the keys and that kind of stuff, and those synchronization fields, there's definitely the potential in the design for that kind of thing from Access, even if it doesn't exist from the get-go here.
I mean, just to be on the safe side, I would try to manage that yourself anyway. Kind of like what I was mentioning before, by having local tables and then just creating a service to synchronize the
Load
tables.
them. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then that way you have both the caching option and the offline option there too. And then once your services are restored, you should have a service that synchronizes the data. I wouldn't always rely upon, the provider giving you the offline capabilities, because things could go wrong there, and then you have a dependency upon their behavior and their API, which, if they change the way that service operates, then it could break your system, and you have to code to that, which would just be much more trouble. It's always better that, you view these type of systems as a plugin, right? You want to make sure that you're maintaining distance, that you are essentially using these data services not as your lifeline, but rather just kind of an optional place to store. And if you needed to change from BI over to, say, an Azure SQL Server, ideally you are allowing yourself the ability to swap those data stores at will. And having that strategy will give you the much more flexibility in controlling the way your data is being stored and managed. And if you need to make changes on the back end, it becomes easy and you can create beta versions of things to test out services like this. So just maintaining some sort of distance there. We typically call it an interface. We want to do dependency inversion. We don't want to rely upon these servers to, we don't want to rely upon the servers. We want to essentially just send them the information as we need it and, use them as some sort of input-output device rather than actually have full reliance upon their capabilities for our application to work.
Steve, aren't you really suggesting that the term reinventing the wheel comes to mind, but no, I don't mean that in a derisory way, but
no, I get you.
You've got a service there that provides all that for you.
Sure.
Now, if you want to be that easy to switch out to SQL Server, various other things, SharePoint, etc. Yeah, you're going to have to reproduce all of those added value items. But wouldn't part of the reason for using Dataverse in the first place be to take advantage of that all being done for you?
If you do, then you are essentially now you are using them as a dependency, right?
I think Dataverse is designed very much for that approach.
Right. And this is in any sort of, this is, it's easy to do. And when we're developing Access applications, we tend to be very quick to, we're interested in rapid application development. So having services provide us capabilities that we can use out of the box sounds extremely good. The problem is that by having that dependency, if anything changes with that dependency, you now have to go and change with it. So they don't care when they make an API change. They don't care if they make some sort of change to the data structure, they change it, they update a field to some different data type. They don't care if, their security protocols need to be changed. They don't care. They get to make those changes. And you now have to adjust because you have a dependency on them. But if you create a system where you are essentially maintaining the data yourself and only using them, I wouldn't call it as a backup, but essentially using them as like an option to store your data, then if they go down and they change their behavior in some way, that doesn't mean your system goes down. Your system can still operate even though they've made API changes. And that's the important thing to maintain for your services, to maintain availability. And the other thing is, by doing it that way, you only have to worry about yourself, and you only have to make that you only have to do that one time, right? If they make some sort of change, you have to constantly adjust and constantly make changes, and that adds to your workload. But if you are maintaining your own data structure and simply using them as like an offline storage that you reference and cache with and make your outside references to, it will become easy for you to make the transition and not go down and not have to make a whole bunch of adjustments every time that they make an adjustment. Does that make sense?
Well, not entirely. I can see a lot of where you're coming from, but I think to a certain extent, you're oversimplifying.
All right. So I'd like to go ahead and, interrupt your conversation. So I did post a link that I missed setting up here. I did have it on the last slide, and someone noticed it, and so it's a post about the migrating linked tables and a little bit more information. It's another good link. We have a couple other questions. There's a couple of them about Dataverse versus SharePoint. I like Dataverse because it's fully relational. SharePoint is really not. It's more of a just, it's based on lists, and it's hard to link lists together. It has some of the other good features like the security and that kind of stuff, but I would consider it, to be used more in simple cases, not if I was going to connect a bunch of tables that are related together. Adrian mentioned SharePoint has been upgraded to be relational now. Maybe that's the case. Maybe I'm behind on SharePoint. So if that's the case, then they're going to be competing with each other to some extent, although not everybody has a SharePoint environment that sets up. a Dataverse environment either. But certainly SharePoint is cheaper from the PowerApps standpoint. So you don't have to pay for it separate. There was another question about switching the connection information for Dataverse backend. I'm not sure exactly what you mean by that, Crystal, other than like if you have a PowerApp and it's connected to one environment, can you use that PowerApp in a different Dataverse environment? Is that the question?
Maria, I think what Crystal's talking about is, if I may, Crystal, is when you have a test environment and a development environment and a live environment, sometimes you want to just switch the access front end so it goes from one to the other relatively straightforward.
Yeah, so you should be able to relink. If you have the same tables in a separate environment, you should be able to use the link table manager to link to the other environment.
Hey, Maria. Well, specifically, I was wondering about using the local cache. Let's say you're working away and all of a sudden a big storm comes and guess what? No Dataverse. So so I'm wanting to be able to now use that local cache, or let's say I'm not developing. Let's say I'm putting information in. So that's the question, and I just want to say this is really a great presentation, and there's lots of good information in the chat too.
So I guess I'm still not following the question. When I think maybe it's related to caching.
Right, yeah, because if it caches stuff locally, and maybe you don't know, but maybe somebody else, Karl, do you know that? Do you know what I'm asking? Is Karl still here? Yeah.
No, I don't know what you're asking.
I think Crystal's bringing up the kind of the same similar points to what I'm talking about. Like, what happens if network access goes down, right? We need some sort of synchronization process to make sure that we are we're synchronizing the data between our local cache and the other systems. And if that network outage happens, then all of a sudden our application is no longer operable. That's not ideal.
Yes, yeah, and it's a problem right now from Access with, for example, I've got clients on SQL Azure, and every once in a while, it's supposed to be 99% up, but every once in a while they have a problem and they can't open their database. It fails on open. I don't think the caching is there yet, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's coming.
The caching that Crystal's talking about, you can find within the options of the general database, where it asks you, do you want to use the SharePoint cache feature that's available with Access 2010 and more? And it does exactly what she said. If the SharePoint lists happen to go offline, it stores your features and it actually uses a negative primary key and then syncs up and pushes those transactions through once the tables are connected.
Is that in current database?
Yes.
So does it maintain a transaction log?
It does. It does not down there at the bottom where it says use the cache format that's compatible. Yes, that is what Crystal's talking about.
So is that only though with SharePoint tables?
Yes.
Now. Okay, so that would definitely be an advantage to sticking with SharePoint at the moment. My guess is that's coming for this too.
I heard somebody from Microsoft saying that it was planned for Dataverse as well, offline working.
Yeah, planned, but maybe I haven't heard any date anyway.
Okay, yeah.
Of course, Maria, if I heard, I probably couldn't tell you, but.
Maria, could you put another question? What would you think is the target group for the target group of Dataverse? Who are they aiming at?
So for me, the biggest target is for either, I can see two types of environments. One is where you've got a critical business access application and IT is all over you because it's not secure enough. And I think moving the data to Dataverse could be a solution. There's other solutions as well, but it could be one option for you to help make the data more secure because of the different security parameters that are available there that aren't with the file-based data. And then the second scenario is, I think, when you want to do something in the Power environment. And we talked briefly, very briefly, about a PowerApp. That's so that you can use some kind of a mobile interface. Primarily, that would be the reason behind that. But there are others, there are other parts of the Power Platform that you could make use of. You could set up Power BI reports to your data and things like that, which would be easier to do from Dataverse than from an Access database. So, and there's other things. There's Power Automate, which used to be called Flow, and it opens up more of a world to you. So if you wanted to take advantage of any of those scenarios, I can see this also being a good fit.
I definitely see the usefulness mostly being in the Power BI stuff. I think more like, leadership level types are more comfortable with dealing with Power BI applications as opposed to trying to deal with direct SQL connections to Azure or something, or SharePoint. SharePoint's always a management nightmare. So yeah, I think it's really the Power BI stuff that's going to make this a real target audience.
So I will also say that I was really hoping recently that I would be able to use Access as an intermediary for Dataverse, because there's some things in Dataverse that you can't do, in my mind, as well as you can do from Access. For example, things like importing new tables and stuff like that. It's just, it's not there from the native UI yet. I think it'll get there. But I was hoping that I could take a table, an Excel spreadsheet from a client, and load it into Access, and then migrate it to Dataverse, and it would be like I wanted it to be in Dataverse. But of course, the order of everything flipped around, and that just was not satisfactory for me. So maybe eventually we can use it for something like that as well. Make Access be a tool.
Like an ETL.
Yeah, exactly.
Plenty of
a great ETL for other instances, right? But anyway.
Maria, you talked earlier about the positioning of the fields when they were loaded into Dataverse.
Yep.
You also commented that when you open a linked table, you can't make changes, which isn't entirely, it's largely true, but not entirely so. There are certain things you can do within a linked table. And I wondered if moving around the fields once it's been put into...
Yeah, I caught that. So that's a good question. Let me close this so it's not dependent. See what we can do. Yeah, it didn't keep it.
No.
So you might be able to get the local view of it, like you might be able to do something.
I think if you did a data sheet, but yeah, like that, you'd probably be able to, but that's not what you're... Well, it might be.
Well, I mean, if you are going to be editing from the table interface, this does stick.
Sure.
So you could do that, and so that is important to point out. I hadn't thought of that, but if I'm going to be editing directly from here, I want to be able to go over here and I want to be able to tab through the fields that I want to enter, and then I'm done, right? So you would have to reorder. But yeah, but you can do that from this interface. All right, I think we probably better wrap it up. We're at 1:35. and let you guys all have the rest of your day. But thank you so much for joining us today. We are going to talk next month about combo and list boxes. And then, if you have any other requests or suggestions for further topics or speakers, please let me know. Really appreciate you all joining me today and bearing with me with this beta version and my limited lack of knowledge because of the newness of the subject. So thanks.
Thank you, Maria. I think you did a fantastic job, and I like the way you showed us everything, and I especially like what you told us to watch out for. It's really been a great help.
Thank you.
Thank you, Maria.
Yep, thanks.
Bye-bye.
Oh, and I also want to thank Karl and Steve and Adrian and Colin and the other people that jumped in and said things that I learned from in the chat and asked you questions, even though you were answering them as they were asking. You did a great job with that, Maria.
Well, there wasn't too many, thankfully. Yep.
Don't put yourself down. I thought you did well.
Tried to make it hard on you.
It's good.
So Steve, what do you do?
So I am I'm an instructor. I train Fortune 500 organizations. I upskill all their developers.
Okay.
So things on, like right now, my primary focus is on Agile and clean coding practices, design patterns, taking the mid-level to junior level engineer, bump them up to senior level or architect, or also sometimes management stuff. So dealing with product owners, product managers, sometimes leadership too, trying to get them in the right mindset for how to manage teams. So it's kind of all over the place.
Very interesting.
That's quite interesting, though.
Thanks for joining us.
Yeah.
I was afraid for a minute that you were a Microsoft employee and I hadn't met you yet. I was hoping somebody from the Access team or the PowerApps team would join us, but I don't think we got that today. So they're very busy.
No, as John quickly realized, I'm the guy that made that 2013 series that became fairly popular. I wish I could pursue more of those videos, but I just don't have time. Always busy working.
Yep.
Nice. Yeah, I was going to say.
It's YouTube, not Tune, right? Or is it called
YouTube.
YouTune? Yeah, I understood.
My keyboard can't spell.
No, that's all right. I get it. About his link, Crystal?
You could just go to programmingmadeeasy.com too.
All right.
That just goes to the same channel.
All right, awesome.
I did that series, a long time ago. It's been like 9 years now.
Well, I'm guessing if it was 2013, it was about 9 years ago, Steve.
Yeah, I want to say something real quick about that. When I was over in Italy and they decided to migrate to 2013, all of a sudden my SharePoint list would not stay connected anymore. So we refused to migrate. So as a compromise, they gave me access. They gave me an instance on SQL Server, which I had no idea what I was doing. However, Mr. Bishop's videos here, I was able to actually show the IT professionals how to properly migrate my tables over to SQL, and the rest is history. I've gained a few pounds from the money I made buying Italian food. So, thank you, Steve.
You gained a few pounds with the Italian food, that's for sure.
Yes, sir.
Everybody does.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Oh, it's great because I love hearing these stories about people. I get them. I still to this day get emails and stuff from people saying, thank you so much for the video series. It changed my life. I got a job because of what I learned there. And, it's kept me employed. It's gotten me better jobs. It's helped me move up in the organization, et cetera. I love those stories because to me, I was just like trying to make a video series just explaining as much of what I understood as I could, because it's at the time, you know, YouTube was just a lot of videos of a lot of different topics that didn't really have any organization or difficult to follow for me. And so I was like, well, I just want to put something out there that makes logical sense to me, and maybe I can explain some of these things in some more greater detail. And the thing I think people don't realize is that that video series has not only launched other people's careers, it's launched my career. I would not be in the position I am, you know, doing the job that I'm doing now, earning more money than I've ever thought I could ever possibly make, simply because I did a video series like that became popular and everybody likes. So my gratitude is towards everybody who's watched them, who subscribes to the channel, who, you know, sends me back information about